morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where we find you in the TOC world community today. For those of you who I have not met, I'm Marcia Hutchinson, the General Manager for the TOC-ICO, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that if you have questions during the webinar, please type them in the question area or click on the hand icon to raise your hand. All questions will be addressed at the conclusion of this presentation, although some may be addressed during the session. For today's webinar, Achieve More with Less Effort, How to Improve Performance and Eliminate Backlog by Applying the Theory of Constraints to Government and Any Type of Bureaucracy, is presented by Alfredo Mycue. Alfredo is the Director of Business Transformation and Rapid Process Improvement at Texas Workforce Commission. He is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and Airborne Ranger. Alfredo is a graduate of West Point, the Command and General Staff College, and holds a Master's in Diplomatic History, Master's of Public Affairs. He's a Project Management Professional credential. He's a TOC Jonah, and he is a Six Sigma Master Black Belt in Efficiency and Equality. Alfredo was the manager of Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, where he helped administer over $400 million in grant funds across 8 major federal and state programs, and also implemented a strategy for continuous improvement for 5 major programs. As a direct result of these team improvement efforts, HUD-backed loans dropped from an average of 138 days to just 59 days to complete processing. Currently, Alfredo leads and coordinates government improvements at Texas Workforce Commission, and he has trained 65 practitioners in the theory of constraints, lean tools, and Six Sigma methodologies. Those practitioners, under Alfredo's mentorship, lead rapid process improvement projects to attain government service production goals while improving quality and customer experience. And for those of you who have attended our TOC-ICO conferences, you may have also attended some of Alfredo's presentations there. Along with Alfredo today is Ellie Schragenheim, who you all know is on board to facilitate some questions during Alfredo's presentation. And now, Ellie and Alfredo, I will turn this over to you. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you, Marcia. And let me take this opportunity, Marcia, to tell you, really on the name of the whole board, very much thank you for everything you did as a CEO of TOC-ICO in the last 5 years. Fellows, let me tell you all, the TOC-ICO, TOC community in general, are not a very easygoing community. We are made of quite a lot of people who are very opinionated, sometimes also with large egos. So there are quite a lot of quarrels and hot discussions and things like this. And this kind of very human support coming from the CEO office is something that I think truly, very truly helped us to go through those 5 years. From now on, we will need some other sort of internal management, some kind to let us go and keep the whole movement of TOC ahead. Now, I like also to welcome Alfredo for coming up with this kind of idea of going, really telling us about what's unique in government and bureaucracy and how TOC can help us so much on this. This is, of course, not a very typical TOC environment, but we already have quite a lot of experience, and I was fortunate enough to listen to Alfredo 2 years ago in Berlin. So, Alfredo, please go on.
All right. Well, thank you very much, both Marcia and Ellie. Marcia, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, brilliant. So, achieve more with less effort is a mantra that we have adopted as we've applied the theories of constraint to the problem sets of government and the challenges that we have. And I just wanted to share with you today a few thoughts on that and share with you some of the successes, some of the things that we've experimented on, and some of the results that we've had. My objective really is to share with you the why and the what and the how of improving government with TOC, so that everybody can gain an appreciation for how government can be substantially improved, and recognize that as this significant part of our economy and our society, that there are different ways to be able to sort of untie the Gordian knot of government, to be able to provide for the citizens that it serves. I think it's important to note that for every dollar at the United States wise, for every dollar that's spent, 36 cents of those dollars is spent by a government entity at the local or national level. So more than a third of every part of our gross national product is government based. And there's a lot of promise in what I'm going to show you today and how these TOC tools and concepts can be applied to government all over. I know there's a lot of government struggling with inefficiency, with backlog, sometimes with corruption. There's long wait times and frustrated customers. And there's another option, simply to growing government, employing more people, and that is to find capacity that may have been overlooked in the process and the growth of government.
Alfredo, please. I'd like you to clarify, your focus is not so much on the politics or the general policies of the government. It's much more on the services, I believe, that the government needs to give to the citizen. Am I right?
That's exactly right, Ellie. So we're not discussing the political aspects and the policies per se and the debate about those. We're talking about the government's ability to fulfill the expectations of the citizens that asked it to perform their duties, their tasks, their mission. For example, licensing, permitting, oversight of contracts, unemployment insurance, investigations, court activities. Those are all government functions. So when we talk about government performance, that's exactly what we mean.
Good. Go ahead.
So here you can see what is a global trend, that the available revenue per citizen as we have growing populations and associated demands is dropping, but we are needing more and more government activity, more and more government involvement. There's greater demands on government every day. Here in Texas, for example, we have a new Texan every 62 seconds drives here or is born here, creating a pressure on government because of those demands. And the options aren't good. Higher taxes, reduced governmental functions, reduced quality, or accepting more risk. So what this idea of continuous improvement, the process of ongoing improvement, has invited a different solution, which is perhaps we can find capacity within the organization, reapply that capacity, especially at points that may constrain us, bottlenecks, to release some of the potential and talent that may be currently stifled. Here's what is happening around the world in government. A lot of times there's seasonality and increased demand that causes backlog. Margaret, a manager that I've worked with, she does open records requests, and she has been inundated based on seasonal demands, especially when folks are returning back to work after the summer. But she always wants to start the work as soon as she gets it. She wants to try to start meeting customer demands. But the backlog starts to cause multitasking to her teams and complaints, and she can't authorize the open records requests to be released at the same pace that's being asked. And so therefore customers are waiting and the backlog is growing. Therefore, she's got less time to make decisions. She's handling more complaints. More things are sort of catching fire in the near term and require reactive action. And good decisions we know require time. So those cause in turn poorer decisions and eat the time that she has available. Then pace is not meeting legal expectations. In her case, she was supposed to answer the public demand within 10 days, and it had gone to 37 days. Other agencies were waiting for requests like the FBI, alcohol, tobacco, and firearm, and other agencies that we had agreements with. Publics were complaining, and we were losing confidence. The public leadership was losing confidence because of the backlog in this process. This is not an anomaly, but this is routine in government. And often the only solution that we offer is to get more people on the rolls and try to address the demand with more resources. But I want to offer another option, achieving more with less effort. Utilizing continuous improvement tools and concepts within the government structure is something relatively new. But imagine that every manager the cost to how to produce their service or their good that they provided society. Imagine them to be able to know when things were improving and to be able to graph that so that they were able to see if things were moving faster and better, if there was more productivity and less cost per overall unit. Some of the things that we might call P&L, profit and loss, are things that we don't do routinely in government. But I think it's important to recognize the mission, the purpose. There's a commitment to the people that we serve. And so this conviction to be able to serve them more efficiently and more effectively, and the question, the way we've always done it, is a new way to look at government. Using innovation to reach our goals instead of doing things the way that we've always done it is sometimes a challenge and is definitely new to government. But the challenge is to work together as a team, eliminate waste, increase our responsiveness to the public, and reduce our costs. And it's really the right thing to do to serve our citizens as the best we can. So what I think is important to do, especially after reading the goal, is to see whether or not we could craft a goal of government, that purpose in terms of performance and operations. Reaching back to Hobbes and Leviathan, we have to preserve the freedom, ensure security, and achieve ever improving value. Value per dollar expended. In other words, to do the most amount of good with the least amount of money. To create an environment where the free market and citizens can thrive in a free, secure environment and get the most out of the dollars that they pay in terms of taxes. So with that goal in mind, we can take a look at the interferences. So this interference chart, taught to me by Kevin Fox, we can see some of the challenges that we have to increasing government value, to having a government that's better this year than it was last year. So one is the one we just talked about that Margaret experienced, which is we're out of capacity. All my people are busy. We don't have any more time for any more work. And so therefore, if we want to address the work that we have to get additional resources. Another challenge is that stakeholder demands shatter our focus. When something happens in the press, when we get a complaint, when a higher official calls down, we have to stop everything that we're doing and address that. In fact, that's an ethic in government. Never to let the phone ring more than a couple times and make sure that you're answering all of the needs of the constituents right away, even at the cost of doing work. Compliance is a huge part of government, but often it's not right-sized to the challenges that the organization faces. A lot of times the compliance has amounted by accretion over time. And so things that are like cover your action or we were sued years before results in certain things being done in triplicate and taking an immense amount of organizational energy. Then you have this other issue that we're going to talk about, which is if I give you your budget of $20 million, manager, you have to spend all of it before the end of the year. and often that can take away incentives to improve, save some of the money to be able to use for other aspects. We'll talk more about that challenge as we talk about the concept of value realized. The other thing is that IT systems are often seen as a panacea, and there is a solution to everything, and the only way to address a challenge then would be with more resources, especially IT resources that make our work easier. So instead of improving the processes per se, we often just automate the convoluted processes that we have on the books. And finally, reorganize and change managers is often something that we default to as opposed to pursuing a more real change. So if that's the affliction, what's the cure? I believe that there's three engines of harmony in government. So that if we have these three engines that are alive and part of our systems, it helps the organization accomplish its mission in the most effective and efficient way and achieve flow in government. And that is purpose, focus, and value. And so our riddle today is, how do we focus to achieve purpose while increasing the value per dollar spent day after day, year after year, with that as an important objective? Let's take a look at those three. So first of all, purpose, accomplish the mission. What's the goal? To accomplish our mission for the citizens that we serve and the public value that they've come to expect. Government is purpose-driven. The people that are in it are purpose-driven. Government folks that are working employees, they're motivated by outcomes that achieve the public good and the value that they create, not necessarily profit-driven.
Alfredo,
yes, go right ahead,
let
Ellie.
me say, you know, I'm not American, so I'm looking from a different country point of view. And I have to tell you that I don't feel that too many of the government people are really have this purpose in mind. They have work, and that's it, sort of. Did you see it in Texas or somewhere else that theoretically there is a purpose, but it is not my purpose?
So often citizens like yourself, Ellie, see things from the distance of the long line or the frustrated wait or the red tape that they face. Sometimes it's difficult to see the idealism and the optimism, and the reason that people joined government in the beginning was to do good for their society and for their fellow citizens. And sometimes the government employees lose that sense of optimism too. So that's why it's important to give them good systems. It's important to give them the ability to improve their systems. I think it's also very important to listen to our government employees because they have good ideas that can be leveraged and addressed to be able to do those systems. I see the frustration and sometimes the distance that you're talking about between them and customers. But I also know that when they have a good system that functions effectively both for them and for their customers, that there's great joy and dedication and commitment in providing you, the citizen, and all the citizens with what we need from a government perspective.
Good. Okay.
So that's part of the objective here. If you think about it, Ellie, there's three wins, right? So one of the wins that you'll see here, because the statistics lay it out, is actually performing and meeting our goals as government, right? Being able to do things at low cost with high effectiveness to be able to accomplish that purpose. The second goal is for you, right? The citizens actually receive it. So if the organization accomplish its mission, then you get your license or your permit or your investigation completed in good time with good quality results. But there's a third win that we can't forget about, and that's the one you're talking about. And that's the win for the people that do the work of government in day in and day out. And that has to be recognized. And that's part of what drives me, drives this initiative, and is a great engine for improvement within government.
Excellent. Excellent.
So if you One time Ellie Goldratt was asked, can you shrink theory of constraints down into one word? Can you distill it into one thing? And he thought for a moment and he answered, focus. And to me, that's the most important word and concept that theory of constraints brings to government. Lean has a tendency to want to pursue improvement wherever it can throughout the process. Six Sigma has the tendency to focus on where the data is and to look where we can, in terms of being able to analyze and improve where we have data that allows us to reduce variation. But focus says, no, let's look across the organization, see what's constricting us, see the bottlenecks, and intensely focus our improvement elements there. And that's the big change for government. Because if you move and we're able to break through the constraint and you're able to increase the productivity at the bottleneck, Ellie, the entire organization feels it. The entire organization knows that more value was created for the citizens that they serve. And sometimes we can see if you improve in different areas like intake, that only frustrates the investigators more because it gives them more work that piles up and now ages. So focusing and applying the 5 focusing steps is an important part of government improvement and really a foundational step. Also, we want to be able to distinguish the urgent from the important. Often we're listening to our stakeholders and trying to be responsive, but we're operating in reactive mode as opposed to a proactive mode that encourages annual planning and the allocation of resources based on what's important, not just based upon what squeak is in the engine that happens to be loudest. And finally, we have to tie value to the production of public good. They have to be tied together. We cannot complain about the budget and the taxes and the weight of government in terms of cost while not asking our managers to know how much it costs what they produce, how much it costs for them to produce a good or a service or a license or a permit or an application. That has to be tied to the actual activities and productivity of government organizations.
Alfredo, I like to offer a little bit my view, and my view is that for any public sector organization, actually the budget is a big initial constraint. And so exploiting this constraint, this is exactly what needs to be done. First of all, exploit, and maybe you also will get some elevation. But first of all, exploit, because and now it gets that every dollar that the government or the people actually invest in this specific function needs to translate to value. We need to find the best way to translate the dollars to value.
And we should not have productivity happen. Like, for example, a child placed in the foster care system without knowing what the costs are and the quality of that and the outcomes of that. But for whatever reason, Ellie, I guess because we're separate from the bottom line too often in government, we have divorced ourselves from that. So we have activities on one side and we have budgets on the other, and never do they meet. And I'll give you a confession. So a confession is, as a government manager, I would look at my budget only a couple times of the year. I'd look at it at the beginning to make sure that they didn't short me for anything. And then I would allocate it towards all of my salaries and all my activities. And then I would do my work for the most of the year. And then about 4 or 5 months before the end of the fiscal year, I would look again and say, am I burning it too fast or am I burning it too slow? Because I know that I have to burn it all. And I didn't have a great connectivity between the work that we did and the cost that we were paying out of our budget. And that can change.
But now, if you look on the budget as a constraint, it means to start with, you need to see how much value can I altogether draw from this limitation of the budget. And so actually trying to exploit the budget is the right thing to do. So I should not just leave some budget because I need to exploit it. I was given dollars in order to convert them into value to the public.
So we'll see later on in the presentation where we were able to take something that cost $3.54, that was budgeted for, but we were able to reduce that to $1.42 for the decisions that were made.
But then you did much more with the rest of the money.
Exactly. And so we were able to redeploy those resources within the organization to accomplish other public need. And in every government, in every situation, every time a legislature votes, there is some public need that's met with the existing resources, and there's some public need that's not. And so what this enables us to do is understanding the value, and what we produce is to be able to reallocate and redeploy that capacity in other areas. We'll talk about some of the particulars and give some of the examples. Let's turn our attention to purpose, accomplish mission. What really drives the folks in government and drives our citizens to make demands of the government legitimate demands. So we can see that there's a dichotomy at work here within this conflict cloud. We all want an effective and efficient government that we can trust to accomplish its operations, provide us security and freedom. But government feels that it must do that in a traditional way, that the way that we did it last year and the year before was very effective, and let's do that again. Let's accomplish what we could within our budget, and let's do it again this year. But we also have a dynamic society that's changing, that's developing, and we need to be resourceful in order to be able to meet its demands. And we talked at the beginning about the government performance gap and about those demands increasing on government. And that, in order to be resourceful and be relevant and be dynamic, we have to have change. We have to improve through our initiatives. But in order to accomplish our traditional mission, we have to focus on our day-to-day mission, which leaves no time for improvement. So which meeting do you want me to go to? Do you want me to go to the meeting about accomplishing my day-to-day tasks for licensing? Or do you want me to go to the meeting where we're improving based upon an initiatives in an improvement project? That's a dilemma for me in government. So some possible injections to this, some possible solutions are perhaps select improvement initiatives that are mission, that relate to the core mission of the organization and what the public is demanding. Identify what is the constraint and focus there. Apply the 5 focusing steps on the constraint, and don't just improve in other places in the organization because we can. Communicate to folks that improvement is mission. Align that within the system so that there's a reward system that supports those improvements. And here's an important one. Don't try to push the mission off of the table and focus exclusively on improvement. These things take time, and the folks that are doing the work need to be able to focus on their day-to-day tasks. We have discovered that they can afford someplace between 8 and 15% of their week on improvement activities, and the rest needs to be meeting public demand. Adopting continuous improvement, and then utilizing strategy, tactics, future reality trees to help craft the organization so that it's moving in the right direction. So I think there's probably not anybody on the call that disagrees with the statement, we want government to serve us better this year than it did last year, and to be able to demonstrate to those of us that pay our taxes for the government. But how do we do that? What's the way that this system works? And what are some of the results from this? And then what I would say, first of all, is the project is the nexus. The project, the improvement project, is what gets you positive results in government. It's not a desire to improve. It's not even an environment. It really is one project after the next that's successful, that gets positive results that everyone can look to and then realize, hey, I want to be part of the next project because that organization just got better, was able to accomplish its task, and is not as harried and is not as distressed as they were before. Here is a 7-step process that we have developed in order to be able to execute improvement projects. You'll see that there are elements in it from Lean, from Six Sigma, and of course, the foundations are theories of constraint. The first one is charter it. Get leadership on board. Design the project and get the buy-in necessary. The second one is vision it. Discover what good looks like. Take a satellite view. We'll talk more about the throughput operating strategy and the strategic compass of having a common vision for what we want the organization to be able to achieve. Map it. Take in a lesson from Lean and value stream mapping. Understand what the as is. Understand what the status quo is. Gap it. How can we better serve our customers' needs? Where could we be doing better? For example, look at audits, look at the data that we may have, benchmarks, other organizations that are similar, self-assessments, talk to customers, listen to them, survey them, and evaluate and ask tough questions of ourselves. That is how we do the gap it synchronization analysis. Build it, design a new future system, have the changes proposed, actually re-engineer the process. Launch it, implement the changes with much ado, with a leadership there supporting the changes. We in government tend to do things the way that we did it yesterday and the way that we did it last year. And change is not easy for us. And it needs to be announced, and I need to be a stakeholder of it if I'm going to be able to pursue this change. And otherwise, I'll move back into my old wagon ruts. So launch it is very important. And then finally, track it. What are the dashboards? What are the scorecards? What are the balance scorecards that are necessary for me to be able to see my improvement? For those of you in the TOC community, you'll recognize these concepts that have proven so effective in government. Make sure that things are full kit before they move on, that we're not giving anything to anybody downstream that doesn't have all the components necessary for them to do their job. Because the minute they find out something is incorrect, or the minute they find out something is incomplete, it has to move upstream, and that causes rework. We can see in government sometimes as much as 40% of the work that we do has had to been reworked at some point. Reduce bad multitasking and focus on what Kevin Fox calls our blue light, or our ability for our counselors to do counseling, for our investigators to be investigating, for our licensors to be conducting the licenses. And in government, because of all the other considerations, the many stakeholders and all the compliance issues, often that blue light fails and fades. For example, we did an analysis of investigators here in Texas and discovered that they were only allocating 51% of their entire day and time to activities that required investigatory talent. And the other 49%, they were allocating to other duties, other activities, administrative in nature, or things that could be done by personnel that were not investigators. If you measure a process, you will improve it. So measuring has its own effect of focus within the organizations. And finally, one of the most important is improve at the weakest link, the constraint, identify it, and apply the 5 focusing steps. So here's some tools that have been developed and are very effective within the government structure. First is the strategic compass, often called the throughput operating strategy. We'll go into what one of those will look like in government. The second is the journey board, or the capacity model, that allows people to track their work through those critical activities and through the constraint. and through an area that we want to control, a point that we want to control. Here's the standard operating procedures, we often call SOPs, and the value streams that really define how work is accomplished in the organization and show where professional standard work is very effective in government. And then finally, the dashboard, the metrics, the key performance indicators, the calculation of financial measures. And you can see that the three engines of harmony: purpose, which gives us mission accomplishment; focus, which helps us break the bottlenecks; and value, which gives us more value per dollar, what you were talking about, Ellie. That is what ties these three important tools or pillars together. Let's take a closer look. So here's some results of this method in government, right? Licensing, 137 days to 74. Investigations, this one's amazing. Sounds crazy, but very true. 84 days to do an investigation, down to 4 days. Appellate decisions reduce their costs significantly. A single family loan closing in a department that was in charge of housing went from 130 days, 38 days to 52 days. IT, I know a lot of folks out there do a lot of IT procurement and contracting. That went from 430 days to 240. Eligibility review reduced significantly. Open records requests we talked about. And then, of course, application reviews from over half a year to 31 days. Kevin Fox was involved in that project as well. So the second engine of harmony in government is focus, that TOC brings us, and this ability to break bottlenecks. Here's the classic laydown of a process that goes from A, B, C, D, and E, each applying value to some throughput, some product that comes out of the system. And you can see the pace of those assets that work. So clearly, in this example, what restricts the flow of value through this government organization is the 10 that restricts us in terms of units per hour. And that has to be called out, and we have to apply the 5 focusing steps. So once that's been identified, then we try to squeeze or exploit as much as we can for C. What does C need to do their job? How can we assist C? How can we then subordinate the other processes to support C? C, in this case, is often the most valuable resource in government. It's often the attorney or the manager or the approving engineer within the process. And so the other elements need to subordinate themselves in order to optimize C. They also need to ask the question, what is C doing that is not its blue light, that is not optimizes its purpose? And how can we take that off of C's plate in order to be able to optimize the pace of C and move that from 10 to 17 or 20 in order to increase the pace of the process? Then we need to say, okay, so once we've exploited, once we have subordinated the other process, are there assets that we can give C to be able to elevate that constraint so that it meets the public need? And those aren't always external. Sometimes we can redeploy elements within the process. Very obviously here, there's wasted resources at D and E that could redeploy in order to provide C. And often there's ways within organizations to get the effort necessary at that control point. So what I love about what Robert and Kevin Fox developed and how it applies to government in the throughput operating strategy, or what we've come to call a strategic compass, is that it ties not only the 5 focusing steps, not only is it a physical representation of that, but as we have also the goal, and we have also measures that we pull into it, and then we describe how the organization will function in or around what the constraint is, which comes to be called the control point once it gets under control. In government, there are a lot of wild bottlenecks that, but once they're domesticated, then they can become control points for the organization. So here, I think everybody on the call, everybody in the webinar has at some point been hired. Ellie, have you ever been hired?
Well, I might say yes. Well,
okay. So here you're already familiar with the process, right?
yeah.
Hire the best people in the least amount of time. We have a vacancy that prompts us to action. We have to determine what to do about it. Do we allow it to lie fallow? Do we fill it immediately? Do we put out a posting? And then we have the action that occurs between HR and the hiring manager. Then there's a search, the applications accumulate, and the cull is the most time-intensive task for a busy manager within the government structure. And then we interview and select, and things start to become easier as we validate and hire and ultimately have an employee, which is the objective of this process. There is a good pool of candidates that the manager can choose from. We're evaluating that with enterprise measures like determining and getting a survey from them, time from vacancy to actual posting, and time from the posting to the hire so that we can evaluate our system. This is a living, breathing five focusing steps for government and one of the pillars of government. Once people have this satellite view of what good looks like in the organization, they can get behind it. They can get consensus. There's great agreement in the organization, and it enables government to achieve alignment, which is often elusive in the complicated structure of government. So that's one of the pillars, is the strategic compass. The other pillar, as we noted, was the capacity model, and which converts into a journey board. In the ideal state, it's a capacity model that says we can accomplish 16,000 applications or investigations this year. But the journey board is a day-to-day movement of those applications through the system that's done in a very team-oriented public sphere where the folks in the office get to work together and then move that value through the system. We'll talk a little bit more about Mark Wopel's development of that tool in his book, Visual Project Management. Then we can see the very traditional lean tool of the value stream map, and then the dashboard and scoring, which is tailored to the needs of the organization as it tracks its improvement over time. So here you see the four tools again. We see the strategic compass as the 5 focusing steps, focusing the organization on what's important and gaining alignment. The journey board is the capacity model. So what good looks like picture and the flow of value through the organization, through the control point. You can see in every journey board, the control point or the constraint is identified, and it helps with goal setting, responsibility, and accountability. Value stream map clarifies the process, identifies standard work, has common expectations, and smooth handoffs. And finally, the dashboard and scoring. Tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I'll behave. And if you measure me in an illogical way, don't be surprised if I respond in an illogical way, because the dashboard and scoring enables us to track performance, improvement, and development, enables us to focus the effort of our team in the right direction. No time to go through it today, but some other effective tools in government. I'll give one example of a strategic path or a future reality tree. Interference diagram, you saw me use that. Very effective tool where we put the goal of the organization right in the middle, and then we ask people, hey, why can't you achieve that goal every day? And believe me, they'll tell you. They'll tell you. And then what we do is we try to flip each one of those, move it in a positive direction, and what emerges from an interference diagram exercise is a strategy for the organization to achieve its goal. Evaporating conflict clouds, you saw an example of that. Haven't successfully implemented critical chain project management, but we're looking forward to that and have acquired some software to do so. There's drum buffer rope and journey boards, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, and the application of what Kristen Cox in Utah calls the choke and release, so that the organization is not overwhelmed by the workflow. So let's talk about this incredible, powerful tool in government. That if any organization adopts this, they will immediately, within a week or two, begin to feel the pull in the right direction and begin to be able to accomplish its mission where before they may have been frustrated. So Mark Wopel in Visual Project Management writes this: as the project or work progresses, a visual project board provides tangible feedback that everyone can see and understand. If there's a gap, they don't waste time talking about where it is or exists or not. It's right there. They can point to it. The situation is obvious. They can monitor their progress and take corrective action earlier. A visual representation of the process removes the largest obstacle to collaboration, agreement on the situation. And if you look at communications as I have in government, you'll see most of them are trying to clarify the situation, not trying to address the problem. And once the situation is obvious, which is what happens when you utilize a journey board, then you're able to actually focus on what the team needs to do and operate together. So it's a living throughput operational strategy, a living strategic compass. It's a visual and tracking representation of your throughput. Some folks call it a Kanban board or work in process or whip board, but it's a team-driven drum, buffer, rope. And in each one of these, the constraint is identified, and the constraint becomes the drum that pulls in from the rope, pulls in more throughput into the process. And we strategically place buffers so that we can handle the variations, the seasonality, and the fact that people may be gone here and there as they go on vacation, etc. The way that the boards are organized through major phases that come straight from the strategic compass and the throughput operating strategy. You can see this one is the software development lifecycle, and development, what they identified as the constraint. So they are now not allowing the constraint to be overwhelmed in the picture that you see right there. The tasks or the projects are the stickies or the magnets that move across the board, that the team moves across the board. And this is the most powerful aspect of the journey board that I love. Each team member says what they said last week. Last week, I said that when I'm standing here before you today, I would have accomplished X, Y, and Z. I accomplished X and Y, but I didn't accomplish Z. And here's why. I encountered this challenge. And perhaps if I call the right attention to that challenge, or get the right resources, or bring it to my leadership's attention, or get the help of my teammates, then I can accomplish it. And then finally we say, okay, here's what I intend to do next week, so that next Monday when I'm standing right here in front of you, I will have accomplished A, B, and C. I anticipate some challenges would be, and here's what I might need from the team to help me do it. Psychology, amazingly effective to have people declare what they want to do and to identify any obstacles in their path and leverage the team and the organization to assist them to do it. And they will do it. It will move the organization forward, just as Mark Wopel identifies. Rework is very clear because the stickum actually moves from one area to the next and causes positive attention to that. And it's important to recognize that there are 3 types of time here. One is actual cycle time from beginning to the end, which of course operates on Little's Law. The second is what the actual goals are of the organization in terms of how quickly they want to do their government throughput. And the final one is what's the actual touch time? How much are we actually spending on each of the projects as it moves through the system so that we can understand our resources that much better and be able to allocate them that much better. Or things like the journey board often follow along paths like this strategic path, which you might otherwise call a future reality tree. And this leverages on the developments and teaching of D. Jacob and Bob, where we talked about the necessary conditions, the key activities or tasks that are required to achieve our critical success factors. Those tasks you see in light blue down below, and they help us get to the critical success factors or those high-level objectives that must be satisfied to achieve our goal. Those tie together with sufficiency-based logic, necessary and sufficient, to be able to achieve our goal, which is the single outcome for which we exist to achieve, that we're all focused on achieving. It makes all the tasks very clear, clarifies the direction and alignment for the organization, and then the good folks in government can do their work starting to accomplish those blue tasks to get to those success factors in purple, finally to be able to meet the goal there in orange at the top. I won't go into the details, but you can see that this is an effective way for us to be strategically aligned and utilized in things like annual strategic development. The third engine of harmony is value, more value per dollar. And I want to go for a second to the Kennedy School of Government, where Mark Moore has made amazing developments in this idea of public value and how we create it within government. Mark Moore teaches a course where he takes the elite from Washington, D.C. and many state governments, and he teaches a course there and talks about how public value is created. But he's identified a huge hiccup in the process and the system. And it's what you identified also, Ellie, when you talked about value and the ability for government to create that value for its citizens. And that, he says, while standard financial accounting systems capture financial flows through an organization, together with the cost expended by an organization in producing particular products and services, right? So, for example, the budget and the mission of the organization, it should be clear that if we want to measure the public value an organization produces, we will have to construct some other technical system that can allow us to record when budget value is being produced. The public value is being produced. In other words, the budget is not sufficient. Just talking about that amount is not sufficient. Just laying out objectives is not sufficient. We have to know what we produce and how much it costs. And June Sequeira adds on in her new book, Public Economy in Crisis, she says that governments are losing public value creation because they're outsourcing it, and they need to be able to retain that know-how. They cannot assume that outsourced government is more efficient than governments done by employees themselves. And we need a way to compare outsourced value with government created value. So that's the challenge. So the leaders in the academic field are challenging us in government to create a better system that has more accountability, that makes sure that we're responsible to the system, to the people that we serve, and we're doing it in a way that's tied to value that we produce and understand the costs. But here's the problem. Here's the problem. Spend it or lose it. If you don't spend it, the next budget next year is going to be that much less. And we'll assume, manager, that you didn't do the job that we expected you to do because you didn't spend all your money. We know that creating public value is tough, and we expect you to spend every dime that you're allocated. But if we spend federal dollars, for example, then that means money goes back. If we save federal dollars, that means money goes back to the Treasury, right? Which states don't want to do, or cities. And so therefore, there's no incentive to improve. The funding model, why improve if it means less money? So, and then when we're faced with more challenges, right? If the economy has a downturn, if we have a hurricane, if we have other challenges, we need more money to meet those challenges. And then, because spend it or lose it, we fight to keep that money. So if we always spend our money, how do we show improvement? Cost avoidance alone does not convey an increase in production of value. In other words, we can spend all our budget, Ellie, we can spend that constraint, and we cannot meet the public value needs that we need to as an organization.
You know, Alfredo, I think you should look at the sixth question of Goldratt on assessing the value of new technology. And I claim it's not always needs to be a new technology, but it does speak about the value from the perspective of the customer. And I think if you embedded it with everything else you have put here, it will highlight it even more.
Right. and and so when we're producing value from the customer's perspective, there is a cost that's associated with that. And if we can produce that value at the same or higher quality level, faster, meeting the expectations of our citizenry, our constituents, then we create value. Does that concept make sense to you? So in other words,
makes
go
sense,
ahead.
but I need to understand what the value is. So it could be doing things in much shorter time. It could be doing things that we could not do before. We could judge the value of introducing IT because if someone can do it from home and immediately, etc., you can see the value of it.
Exactly. So let's say, for example, let's take your example of IT. So there's a service desk ticket that's created when you have a problem or a bug on your computer that you have. So that has a certain cost that's associated with being able to respond, to go in, to address the challenge or the issue. And over time, we see that cost. If the quality goes up, if the customer service is measured, first of all, and then it goes up as well. If the turnaround time to be able to address those tickets on average goes down, then with the overall quality of that function goes up. If, because we measure it, we know the cost is actually going down as well, then we're actually creating measurable value in the same way that you would, in a similar way to what in business you would measure as profit, because we're actually increasing the value that's delivered to the customers while we're simultaneously reducing the cost. Does that make sense to you, Ellie?
Absolutely.
But there's a challenge to this, in this dilemma, right? And the challenge is we want an effective government. We want to meet the changing needs of society, but we also want to be right-sized to the scope of government. We don't want government to grow and grow and grow. There's a gentleman that studied the Foreign Office, the Colonial Office in Great Britain, by the name of Parkinson's, and is given his name to Parkinson's Law, where even despite the fact that the amount of responsibility that the Colonial Office was dramatically reducing during the as the British Empire moved into its sunset years, the size of the Colonial Office continued to increase because it was never adjusted for the right size to scope before it was ultimately disbanded and moved into Whitehall with the Foreign Office. So there needs to be innovation and improvements and change to be able to reduce funding. But we've seen in the examples that I've given that every solution, or nearly every solution, we want to increase and maintain funding. So what do we do? How do we solve that dilemma? If we can't do our work, we ask for another person. But there is not enough incentive to be able to improve and reduce our funding. So there's a dilemma that's at work within this conflict cloud. So here's a few injections in this idea of this engines of harmony in government, which is value. Know how much it costs. Know the efficiency and the effectiveness and be able to measure that. Knowing the efficiency and the effective incentivizes vital behaviors and decisions. Managers want to improve. Managers want their organizations to do well. Managers want to contribute value. But if that's obscured, if that's opaque, then they can't represent that, then they lose the incentive for positive change. And so one way for them to report it is with this concept that I'm going to introduce called value realized. And to be able to take that additional value and to fund the unfunded. For those things that do not have allocated money necessarily within your budget, but nonetheless need to be done so that the wheels of government can continue to move forward, we can use that to fund the unfunded. That's being done right now in the US, I have a lot of colleagues from the military that are now post commanders. And because of the constraints and the belt tightening, they don't have enough money to be able to take care of their lands in terms of landscape and in terms of the existing playgrounds for the children and other things for that social structure. And so what they're doing is they're doing improvements in other areas like motor pools, taking those savings and then reapplying it so that they can enrich their communities in those other areas. And again, I love Yuji Koshira's statement that knowledge can be a powerful injection. And when we do the right measurements, we understand our efficiency and effectiveness. That knowledge of where we are and where we want to be is a powerful injection to this dilemma. So let's turn to this. If we're going to measure this and we're going to understand this productivity, we have to connect quality, productivity, and operational expenses. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel because it's already been invented. In the race, Ellie Goldratt and Robert Fox talked about this use of this measurement, QT over OE, or quality throughput over operational expenses, as a way to counter the illogical cost-cutting fad of the day, which was to continue to reduce costs, even if those costs were associated with the productivity at the constraint, just like is described in the goal when Jonah is so critical of trying to reduce costs around the constraint, the NCX. The Utah uses QT over OE to measure agency productivity and has for the last 4 years, and actually exceeded their objectives in measuring and improving government by over 25% in 4 years under Governor Herbert's initiative led by Kristen Cox. And here in Texas, in the workforce, we've identified throughput, quality, and expenses to calculate QT over OE on a monthly basis and report that on a monthly basis. And the results are astounding in terms of the reduction of costs, the increase of quality, and the improvement in timeliness and responsiveness. Here's a slide from Kristen Cox's presentation in 2014 TOC-ICO conference, where she defines each one of these elements of quality, the throughput, the units that are passing through the system, and the operational expenses, which she stresses are all of the operational expenses associated with producing that quality throughput. How do we apply this in government? Okay, I have a simple example. The simple example is making cakes. You're making cakes for your church's bake sale. You make 10 cakes, cost $42.78 to produce all 10 cakes. 7 turn out great, and 3 are turn up ugly, which you will never take to church because the other folks at church would talk about your poor baking skills forever. And so your T is 10 cakes, but only 7 are quality. So therefore your QT is 70%, or only 7 out of 10 cakes. The OE obviously is what you paid at the grocery store, $42.78. And so $1 buys you 16% of a cake in this case, or a QT over OE of 0.16. You take the inverse of that, and it tells you on every time, it tells you how much it costs per unit, which in this case is $6.11 per cake. And if you lower your costs and are able to buy materials, your QT over OE goes up. If you increase your quality, your QT over OE goes up. And if you increase your productivity, QT over OE goes up. If anything good happens, QT over OE goes up. And you can represent QT over OE as percent changed. So you don't have to necessarily be comparing apples and oranges. You can compare percent change. And should managers want to compare whether there are improvement levels, et cetera, they have a common way to be able to do that. I was having a conversation with one of the leaders, national leaders in terms of government performance and measurement, and he told me we were trying to figure out how to represent that so that we're able to capture the improvement in value. And finally, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Alfredo, the area under the trend line and above the baseline is the value realized. It's the amount of value that we are producing now that before we made the improvements we were incapable of doing. And so we can capture that We can measure that area, we can measure that amount, and we can see how much more value has been achieved based upon improvement. And now that incentivizes us to create value, whereas before we would top out at expending all of our budget. But now we can represent that value in actually monetary terms. And so it's this concept called value realized. The value of additional work that's made possible through improvements in efficiency, productivity, quality, and leadership. And here's the deal, Ellie, it's in dollars or any currency you want to put it into, right? Because it's the additional costs that would have been incurred with the old baseline for producing the new volume that we're capable of doing. Let's take a closer look. So this value, sometimes people call cost avoidance. They call it cost avoidance because there's no other term to describe it. But I would argue that cost avoidance, when you have dollars on the table, reduction of OE, like for example, reduction in inventory that's unnecessary, that's a type of cost avoidance, but also a type of value realized called the reduction, the money that's on the table, true savings, actual savings. But when you produce more work, when you meet more public demand, when you improve higher quality, when you reduce timelines, when you accomplish mission, when you accomplish purpose, then you're creating value realized. And that has a dollar value. And the team that improves has bragging rights now to represent that dollar value as they continue to do improvement. Ellie, just a couple minutes. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Sure. Just take that OE of this kind of organization is actually the capacity of the constraint. And so the dollar, quality dollar by OE is actually how much you can, you create throughput out of one unit of your constraint. This is the value per dollar.
And so if you look at OE as a constraint, you're actually getting more value out of the constraint. You're exploiting the constraint.
Absolutely. This is exactly the meaning.
You're moving more through the constraint. And like in a factory, like in the goal, that can be measured in government. It's never been measured before, and this is a new proposal, but it can be measured in government. And what we've discovered here in Texas and in Utah is what a powerful incentive, what a powerful psychology for people to be able to say that my team of 4 people accomplished the work of 5 people, whereas 2 years ago, we were never able to do that because we exploited the OE, we exploited the constraint. Love it. So let's take a look at the example. So there might be somebody out there, Ellie, that says, well, wait a second, I don't understand. What's this value realized? And is it really real? Because I'm not seeing any extra money there, and I'm paying the same amount of taxes, right? So imagine that you have a team that produces 100 determinations per team member, and there's 4 team members. So the amount that they were produced together, 4 times 100, is 400 a week. And then they go through an improvement project, right? They charter it, they vision it, they map it, they gap it, they build it, they track it, they launch it, all of those things, and then they move to 125 determinations per week per person. By the way, that's routine. Go through this improvement project and go through those processes. You're going to improve by 25% or more within government and find that capacity. Right? So now the same 4 people are now producing 500 per week. And if we were to go back in time, we would, and we didn't have an improvement project. The only way we would have got to 500, Ellie, is by hiring another person. If the governor would have called and said, hey, you're only doing 400 per week, I need you to move to 500 per week, and I need you to do it next week, the only way would be to pay overtime, to hire another person, or to take it out of hide, beat the drums faster, and exhaust people on the treadmill, right? And instead, what we did is our improvement project resulted in the value of one FTE, or one's person worth over the year, because that one conceptual FTE would have done 5,200 of these determinations during the next week. So if we had no improvement, what would this have cost? One person's salary. That is value realized. And that's money is a language that everyone understands. It's a universal language. We have turned, this concept turns improvement into money that citizens can appreciate. Why? Because they got more value. They got 100 more per week out of the same team of 4 people. Okay, let's look at an example, right? So this one is an application determination. And you can see this is a real project. These are real numbers. They're verified by real accountants. Okay, so this is 2011 here. You can see what the situation was is it cost 1.02 million in operational expenses to produce that 288,000 determinations that they did. I think these were tax determinations, tax credits. And you can see here that in comparison, if you look down the timeline and you see 2016, you can see that that same 288,000 cost only 410,000 in operational expenses. Whoa. So they did all that work, but it cost them less because of the improvement that it made. And then if you look at the green up there, that's gained quality throughput that is actually more work that the team was able to do with no additional costs. And that additional work, if you compare the baseline, was valued at $2.2 million. So the cost per determination fell from $3.54 to $1.42. That's something that a manager can state proudly, that I met the demand of our citizens, and I did it in less time, from 194 days to 61 days, sometimes going as low as 31. I did more determinations from 294,000 to 459,000, and my quality rose. Ellie, what's not to like? And also, isn't it awesome to be able to represent that improvement in actual numbers that show that you were able to exploit that constraint? Here is another example. In this example, well, no, this is the same example. I'm just showing you in a different ways. There's the quality throughput that we see increased from 11 to 16. And you can see the difference. The blue line is the total operational expenses, actually what they actually paid out. So this is actually from the financial statements books. And then the red line is what they would have paid out if they were charging what they used to charge, which was $3.54 per determination. So the difference between the red line and the blue line is on the bottom, and that is the value realized, $3.47 million over the course of those 4 years since the improvement took place. Another example, this is rescheduled hearings and unemployment insurance, a multi-billion-dollar operation across the United States. It went from $114 to do an appeal to what it ended up at there. It was $107. Doesn't sound like much of a reduction until you learn that they do 100,000 of these a year, resulting in $3.1 million of value realized and work done for the citizens. Ellie, we're nearing the end of my presentation here today, but I wanted to share more results, right? So 30% more improvement in quality or productivity is routine. 25% or more gain capacity in nearly every case that I've shared with you, and nearly every case that we worked on with this method of applying TOC to government. The value realized for the citizens is in the millions. You can see service school applications. These are people who want to open a dental technician or a mechanic school from 137 days to 84. There's the tax credit reduction. IT projects reduced productivity by 50, increased productivity by 53% in 4 months, meeting their objectives in terms of project completion. Discrimination investigations from 207 days to 56. In this case, it was for HUD, was the financial backer, and reduced award times from 170 days to 96. These skills and what we shared with you today in this webinar 100% transferable. You don't have to have a Jonah to do it. State employees can reach into these tools and adopt them and utilize them. We see it all the time, and they're trained in this new system, and they have the rich body of knowledge for any challenge that they have to do. So imagine your team improving by 25% or more, doing more with less effort, more quality, more productivity at less cost, and measuring the value realized for that. Every manager knowing how much it costs to produce their goods, and imagine a team of 17 doing the work that used to take 20. And if you were the government manager, what would you do with that? What would you do with the value you realized? Do you invest in the organization? Do you return it to the taxpayer? Do you reward the folks? Do you do more training? Do you buy a new system that will help you do it more efficiently? Because as we talked about before, it's a three-way win. It's a win for the organization that's able to accomplish its assigned mission. It's a win for the citizens that are getting things better, faster, cheaper, in a friendlier way. And it's also a win for the people who actually do the work because they're able to achieve more with less effort. And now we have some time for questions, a good 15 minutes or so or more. And we're happy to be able to entertain. Ellie, why don't we start with you with the first question?
Okay, Alfredo. How would you go if the authority of airports will come to you with a request, can you help us to reduce the huge queues at the security?
So the first thing that I would do is, of course, I would apply the 5-step to the process, right? And I would say, well, what does good look like for the organization? So what are the critical activities that occur? And to develop a strategic compass to do so. Identify what the constraint is. The constraint to me would likely be the actual scanning system along with the people who ran the scanner. So what probably constrains it is the human being that has to go through the scanner, not necessarily the luggage that goes through. You could get more of those. You could organize it so that has the throughput, so that those would be non-bottleneck type activities. But what probably is, and if you look at the queues where the line usually is, my bag usually beats me through the scanner, and I'm waiting at the scanner to go through. So then you would turn to your capacity model, right? Applying the second one. So that's what good looks like. That's the strategic compass, right? We want to be able to get through this number of people at this rate in order to be able to accomplish our tasks of providing security, but having also enabling people to execute the travel. And then the second one you turn your attention to is what's the capacity model. So that would be whatever is the rate would be the optimal rate of the people who can step through and still be able to have the security measures that are necessary to do so. Then you look at it and you might want to map out the processes, determine what needs to be done, what are the best practices in the field, what is the professional work that needs to happen, write those down and share them with all the airports so that nobody is building these things from scratch and we're all benefiting from each other's experience. And then finally, we want to be able to measure it. We want to have a dashboard. We want to have a way to understand when things are not meeting our expectations, what's going on, and when they are, how to exploit those improvements and opportunities. How does that sound, Ellie?
Looks good. I think you touched upon the right points. Thank you.
Okay, so do we have some questions from the field?
We're going to the typed in questions. The first one I have is from Danilo Sirius. In your QT over OE equation, do you include salaries, etc., in your operating expense?
So great question. The answer is yes. We include all of the associated expenses that we can do. Now, some of them can only be applied at the end of the year. Like, for example, if you have a retiree structure, and those might come in as a lump sum, but we apply those when we know about them at the end of the year. And we would include salaries, we would include equipment and supplies, every cost that's associated with producing that value. If there are other contracts that are associated with producing that value, then they would also be included. And the more encompassing the OE, the better the social incentive and understanding of the costs so that we can have more opportunities to identify and reduce those costs.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Brendan Fox, and this was from early on in your presentation. So Brendan, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
I'm in a Starbucks in Pittsburgh, so I don't know. If you could just pass it to Ellie Schragenheim for me, that would be fine. I don't want to have my comment be public, but it had to do with I thought we were breaking the flow of the presentation a little bit.
Okay, all right.
With the questions, but just pass that to Ellie.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? You may click the raise your hand icon or write them into the questions box. We'll give it just a few seconds to do that. Okay. It looks like that's it on the questions. Did you have any other additional information for closing, Alfredo?
Alfredo, can you
yes,
just mention, because you put bureaucracy at your heading, where this comes into?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Ellie?
I'm sorry about my accent, but you mentioned bureaucracy.
Oh, yes. Great question. So really, we talked mostly about government entities here, but these questions about forms and processes and approval levels, they're not unique to government. They're very heavy within the healthcare industry, for example. Many nonprofits are doing the work of government, and they have to meet these compliance requirements. They have to file the right paperwork. They have to file the right reports. And those things are also covered in these practices. So these concepts and tools that have led to so much success in the areas that we talked about also apply to those other areas of nonprofits, of higher education, of secondary and primary education, and also in the healthcare industry. Thank you, Ellie, for allowing me to point that out.
We have another question from Talal Al-Sharif. Are the benefits gained for this project based only on the TOC intervention, or were there other interventions?
Also, an excellent question. So we see that there's certain aspects from all of the major improvement methodologies that have come together to be able to get these results. Truly, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. If you look at the value stream and the processes, the journey board is essentially a lean tool that you would see modified to be able to track throughput through a factory or a production facility. And it's been modified and reformed to be able to track government tasks and government processes. If you look at the dashboard and the data that it collects, you can see that a lot of the Six Sigma statistical analysis can now be applied to the data that's collected from those dashboards to try to understand where the variation is, try to understand why there is such a spread within the data, and to try to get those processes to be more predictable within the system. And there are also a lot of project management. So for example, the PMI Institute and the Project Management Book of Knowledge also has given a lot of ideas and concepts to this emerging discipline of improving government. Also, systems thinking and change management are also very important here. For example, one of the change management principles is to make sure that the changes are communicated to the people that are actually going to be putting them into place. But in this case, since it's the people that do the work that are making the changes, we've discovered that change resistance plays little to no role if you use this method and model.
Okay, and Talal says thank you. Are there any other questions? You may type in or raise your hand. I think that might be it. Okay, well, would like to thank everyone for attending today.